The only lawn I got is in front of the apartment building. I'm so grateful that I don't have to mow a lawn anymore. Like
I'm hoping to mow the lawn.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lang LeBlanc Podcast, and don't forget to follow us on our socials at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Enjoy!
The views and opinions expressed on the Lang and LeBlanc Podcast are solely those of the hosts, producers, and guests of the program. They in no way, shape, or form reflect those of any affiliates the presenters or guests represent.
Wherever you're listening today, welcome to the 22nd installment of the Lang LeBlanc Podcast. I'm one of the hosts of the Lang LeBlanc Podcast. My name is Brady Lang. Avery is off this week. Before we get things started, first I'd like to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded, operated, and edited on Treaty 6 territory and on the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. Together we are stronger, and together we are better. This week on the show...
And don't be afraid to call the elders and just straight out say, look, I'm feeling uncomfortable, or look, I don't know how to approach this, or just be straight with your questions, take some tobacco and talk to them, and they'll spend the time with you.
It's David Kirton. He's a former radio host, news director, disc jockey, you name it. David's probably done it on the broadcast side. He's a city councillor now, but before that, he was someone who taught me so much. And I hope he's able to teach you a thing or two as well. After this episode, we here at the Lang and LeBlanc Podcast are taking some time off to reflect following the horrific findings at a Kamloops residential school. We pledge to learn through this week and take a moment to listen. This is an important time in our history, so we are going to be putting the microphone down, and we are just going to listen. Thank you for listening. Now, let's send it over to Mr. David Kirton. Our next guest on the program is a former broadcaster who spent many years manning Saskatoon Afternoon and meeting ground on Ralco's airwaves. He's someone I consider a mentor, someone who took the time to help me out even back in the North Battleford days. He's the councillor for Ward 3 in the city of Saskatoon. Please welcome the legend and our next friend of the podcast, David Kirton.
Why, thank you. Very kind words. Thank you very much, Brady.
How have things been going for you, David?
Fantastic. I say that without a hesitation. I wish I would have done this 30 or 40 years ago. Being a city councillor has good days and bad days, just like any other job or career. But I've loved every single day. It was interesting. As soon as I was elected, I was running because we had the big snow event, right? Which happened, which of course forced us into 2 election days, really, and then we were in the cleanup mode from all of that snow, and I was dealing with snow complaints for probably 2 months straight. It was an interesting introduction to representing my Ward 3 residents. And I thought, oh my goodness, is it going to be like this all the way through? But it kind of slowed down after a while. But I did start off running, that's for sure.
So that snow event was one of the most bizarre 24 hours that Saskatoon's kind of had to deal with. What was it like for you? Obviously, you were kind of sitting on pins and needles, but how were things?
Well, first of all, the snow event kind of was mixed with rain, some freezing rain, and all of that. So in terms of how it crippled the city, everybody knows. We were, of course, on the last day of our campaign, and what we needed to do was to get these brochures out for these last days of the campaign to get people to the polls. There's kind of a system to campaigning. And by that last day, I was in knee deep in snow already. So I knew election day was going to be interesting. Election morning, by the way, those brochures said if you need a ride, give me a phone call and I'll give you a ride. At that time, I owned a Kia Rio, and that's smaller than the hat that you have on your head. So I tried that election morning to get the Kia Rio out of the garage, and I hit the front driveway and realized I'm not going any further. I can't do anything. Thankfully, oddly enough, I never got any calls for rides that day. I just think everybody knew, okay, we're all stuck here, right? And of course, the city waited till about 5 o'clock to determine that it was going to be the Friday the 13th when the next election day was going to be. And so during that time, I went and voted, but quite frankly, I didn't think about it other than me voting. I wasn't thinking about the election that day because all we were doing throughout our neighborhood was helping to dig people out. So that kept me busy, I guess, kept me not thinking. The day of the next election, the Friday, November 13th, of course, everybody could get to the polls then, and it was a good time. And I was thinking a lot more about the election that day, of course. The night of, the results were going to come out at or the polls close at 8 o'clock. So everything's electronic. I thought maybe the results would be out by about 8:30. Nothing by 8:30, nothing by 8:45. So I decided to take my dog, Phil the Newshound, out for a walk. And we went out for about 45 minutes, and I came back and boom, everything was done. The numbers were all in. Of course, again, electronic voting or the electronic way in which they count those votes. And so I came back and it was all over. I had no opportunity to watch the numbers go up or anything like that. It was just come into the house and realize that we had won. And it was obviously a very, very fine moment. But, during this course of the campaign, which was, I call a shotgun campaign, it was only a month long. My girlfriend / campaign manager, Erin, was able to recruit about 45 volunteers to help us. And that night, the election night, we would have been on a normal night at some kind of hotel room or something, a small banquet room, watching the results come in. But there was just me and Erin and Phil the Newshound. It was kind of weird. We celebrated, but we didn't celebrate with anybody else. So thanks COVID, thanks snow, all of that sort of thing, right? It was totally a different election year than probably any of us will ever experience again.
It was kind of weird because I saw you the day before the first election, and you may have been wearing shorts. So to have
I may have been wearing shorts.
Yeah, you were taking down some signs, I believe. It was right before the storm hit, or you were putting them up.
I must have been putting up.
I was picking up Easton from his daycare, and I rolled across and I saw you. Yep, we chatted for a little bit.
Right,
there, and
I remember that. Yeah. You're right. Though. Wasn't that weird? So during the campaign, and here's one thing I'll tell you. I'll talk a little bit about the campaign here. When we started the campaign, of course, the big part is door-to-door knocking. And I wasn't looking forward to that. And our first 3 or 4 doors, it was kind of stilted. It was stiff and everything like that. After that, that became our therapy every day. I mean, we'd have to do brochures, we'd have to do signs and, other campaign tasks. But Erin and I could not wait to get out and knock on more doors. Man, that's therapeutic to talk with people about, and people aren't ranting, people aren't going crazy on you or anything. And that, by the way, was what I was expecting. But they're not that. Everybody's very respectful. But a lot of times during that campaign, the wind, for whatever reason, was blowing 50, 60 kilometers an hour, 70 kilometers an hour. And people were standing at the front door in bare feet and pajamas and talking to me for 10 minutes. And I thought, wow, you guys are pretty amazing to take that time and to freeze doing it at the same time. Yeah, but the weather we had 4 seasons in that campaign, didn't we? Because you're right. I remember now being in shorts, but it was a shorts kind of day. And then just a couple of days later, we had the snow event. So yeah, we went through 4 seasons in that event or during that campaign. But I really did enjoy campaigning. I really loved meeting people. And I met a guy by the name of Adil. Adil and his family came from Syria and had only been living in Saskatoon for about a year. So that gives you an idea of the kind of life Dill and his family had lived before they arrived in Saskatoon. And I can tell you it involved, dodging bullets and bombs in Syria, dealing with refugee camps, and finally, it wasn't just 1 year, it was a number of years, finally making it to Saskatoon. But he and I had a fantastic conversation through his older son, because his older son was a translator. And we probably talked for 15, 20 minutes about Syria. And I told him a little bit more about Saskatoon. And at the end, he invited us in for pizza. And of course, it's COVID, so no thanks. But it was a very nice thing, and we're friends to this day. So I met a lot of great people along the campaign route, and I look forward to meeting a whole lot more. You know what? One of my colleagues on City Council, when I was telling him the story about knocking on the doors and how I found that therapeutic, he literally does that for therapy. If he has a bad week, he goes and knocks on doors. Hey, how's things going in your neighborhood or in our neighborhood? And he says that's his therapy as well. So you know what? Meeting people and being social, it is healthy after all. I worked for 43 years in broadcasting, and the last 20 was at Ralco. And most of that time, I love my job there. Don't get me wrong, but most of that time, I was stuck in a studio with a half-hour deadline. I had to worry about a new newscast every single half hour, or I was worried about the show. When I was campaigning, I was on Centennial Drive in Saskatoon, and the school just got out for 3:30 in the afternoon. I heard the bell, and then I heard the kids all clamoring out of the school and getting into the cars, and mom and dad yelling, "Hey, we're over here," or whatever. And I realized, wow, for the last 20 years, I've missed that kind of stuff, because I had never been out of the studio during the day for those last 20 years, even actually you could say for the last 43 years. And I realized I want to be outside now. So this new job now, being a city councillor, gives me the opportunity, the flexibility to be outside a little bit now during the day. And I'm very thankful for that. But it was quite the realization of, as much as I love broadcasting, it was quite the realization how I was stuck inside all those years.
I remember when we were told that you were going to run for councillor. And the first thing I did was I said something I can't say on air. Well, not on air. It's weird with a podcast, right? But it was a good thing. I cheered. I was happy for you, very happy for you, because I know working alongside you, I knew how just kind of enriched you were in that sort of knowledge and knowing basically all the ins and outs when it came to City Hall. But I remember the first conversation I had with you also, and you said you were nervous. How quickly did those nerves kind of dissipate for you when you made that decision? And looking back, how much was this the right decision for you? Because you've already said that on the show. So, oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Don't we? There's that slogan that's used more than anything else. Without hesitation, it was totally the right decision, and it was the right time, because it was time. It was a good time for me to leave radio. 43 years is lots. Talk about being nervous. I was nervous during those first days, and the learning curve was vertical. But here's the thing: I'm still nervous when particular issues come up. And you've got to make a decision. You've got to research it. And I'm still nervous. Am I making the right decision? Because, and I'll talk with as many people as I can about it, or I'll hear from as many people as I can about it. But I'm still nervous about not making the right decision for the people who have elected me. So that's going to be something that probably follows me all the way along. Those are the citywide issues that make me nervous, bikeways or other issues like that. And what doesn't make me nervous, and what carries me through most of my days, are the ward issues. So, and that's the roads and the sidewalks and that sort of thing. And if I can help somebody with a problem with their road, with their sidewalks, maybe safety, maybe traffic, if I can help somebody in the ward with that, that's amazingly gratifying. And I go home feeling really, really good. At the end of a city council meeting, I'm not necessarily feeling good. about all the decisions that we as city councils made, or that I made in any particular decision, because a lot of those issues are not win-win issues. Somebody has to lose sometimes, especially when we talk about maybe infill. And we'll have an apartment. Well, there was this issue of a complex being proposed for Main Street in Saskatoon, and there was much opposition to it. But at the same time, quite frankly, the development proposal itself made a lot of sense for what the city's trying to achieve in terms of developing infill, making sure that these older neighborhoods are sustainable. But a lot of people were very unhappy with that decision. And so you can't help but walk away wondering, did I make the right decision, right? And so I talked to a lot of people even after making a decision, just to try to kind of debrief and try to understand whether that was the right decision, A, or B, what I could do in the future, maybe to help me make the proper decision. Anyway, it's my long answer to your question of whether I was nervous. I think I'm going to be nervous all the way through it at times, if nothing else.
And right now, I kind of want to take a step back. We've been talking a lot about city council and everything, but this is a profile interview. So what I'm wondering from you, can you kind of take me back to where your love of broadcasting and journalism kind of sparked in your life, and kind of how that led down the path to Ralco, Saskatchewan Afternoon, Meeting Ground, all that fun stuff?
Wow, this is going to be a long answer.
Go for it. We're on a podcast. We can do that.
That's right. Well, Brady, way back. No, I won't do that. So I was in university back when I was a kid. I was in university. As a matter of fact, I wasn't in university as a kid. I entered university as an adult, and I was majoring in one of those areas that was guaranteed to never make me any money. I was majoring in political science, in the arts and science, and I was loving it. And I was in my second year, part way through third year, and I went down into what they call the MUB at the University of Saskatchewan, and I think it was called the Memorial Union Building, but we called it the MUB, and that's where all the student lounges were, and pinball games, which kind of caught me for a little while. But there was also a radio station down there. It was a university radio station called CJUS, which we called C-Juice. I went in there one day just curious because they take volunteers, and they allowed me in, and I started a noon-hour show with classical music, probably mispronouncing every single composer in that, and I ended up doing that for about a year while I was going to university. But then I got an offer to go work in Rosetown at CKKR, Wide West Radio. And I decided, yeah, I'll go give it a try. So I gave up university and I went into radio. It's in Rosetown, and made it there for about 6 months. I was being a country and western DJ back in the day. Somebody heard me and offered me a job at CKOM in the 1960s or 1970s, late 70s. And so I went and worked there for a couple of years. Moved over to Edmonton and worked at Ched Radio in Edmonton and at CJCA. Had a really good time. I got to stay at Ched Radio in Edmonton. It was the #1 rock and roll station. I was working in news by that time, anchoring and reporting. That's where I got my first taste of award-winning reporting, I guess you could call it. I won an award for my reporting on something that a lot of people don't remember anymore. It was a hostage taking involving then Oilers owner Peter Pocklington. He was held hostage in his house, and we were camped out about half a block away, police keeping away. And I received a reward for that. I got to tell you, one of the funniest things about that day, there were so many reporters who were camped out to where we were stationed, where we were told to be, that one of those hot dog trucks came up and parked there and probably made a killing that day. So I thought, there's an enterprising guy, you know. So CJCA and Ched, that was good to me in Edmonton. And then Edmonton, or Ched, was owned by Moffat Radio at the time, and another station that Moffat owned was CHAB in Moose Jaw. And so they moved me down to be news director at CHAB in Moose Jaw, and I worked there for about a year, but I had an opportunity to come back home to Saskatoon and be a news director at CJWW. And so I was news director at WW for about 10 years. That radio station was owned by Clint Forster, who also owned what was called Telecable at the time. It was the cable company for Saskatoon. And so he offered me the job to be the program manager for Telecable. And I jumped at it because I wanted to move into some TV. And Telecable was bought out by Shaw. And they also purchased the cable systems in Prince Albert, Moose Jaw, Swift Current, Assiniboia. And so I became a regional program manager for Shaw Cable for those 10 years. And that gave me an opportunity to drive around Saskatchewan and do some TV in different areas. And then I was courted by Rolco Radio once again, and that was 20 years ago. And I started at News Talk Radio. News Talk Radio was about probably a year and a half, 2 years old at that time. So what I remember about those times was how we would try certain things out. Because News Talk was brand new in Saskatchewan. And I got to tell you, everybody told Gord Rawlinson, well, you're not going to make it with this. This is going to cost you a whole lot of money. It's going to be a big fail. And Gord, he stuck with it. I got to give him credit with that. And I know it's not an inexpensive thing to stick with. News Talk stations are expensive to run. They employ a whole lot more people than FM radio or music stations. But he stuck with it, and it's paid off. It's still going strong, obviously. So I started out in mornings there. Here's one thing: I was working mornings when I was working at CKOM in the 70s, and I thought, wow, I get to do mornings again. When I worked mornings in the 70s, I'd go golf 36 holes in the afternoon. It was just beautiful. I got really good. Still hated it, but I got really good. And then I came back and I thought, well, I could do mornings again, not realizing that was about 30 years or 20 years later, I guess. And I realized, no, I can't golf in the afternoon anymore. I need my sleep now. So that's what I ended up doing. And then I moved to afternoons to host a couple of different shows. There was one called Afternoons with David Kirton, and then we finally got around to Saskatchewan Afternoon with David Kirton. And I also kept my hand in anchoring news as well, because that was really important to me. I never considered myself a really strong show host. Okay, I think I did okay. I always felt I was a really good storyteller, and so that was the kind of show that Saskatchewan Afternoon was with me. It wasn't about opinion. It wasn't about trying to catch the top news item or trying to catch anybody off guard in any interview. It was about telling stories, and that's what I've always prided myself in. I can tell a pretty good story, and so that gave me the opportunity to do that. But another thing that gave me the opportunity to do that, and the opportunity to learn a whole lot more about myself, was becoming a host and producer of Meeting Ground. Meeting Ground was Rolco Radio's Indigenous Affairs program that aired on 4 or 5 stations throughout Saskatchewan for probably about 15 years, 16, 17 years maybe. So it would air as far north as Prince Albert, La Ronge for a while, North Battleford, Saskatoon, Regina, of course. And the man who gave that show its birth is Mervyn Brass. And Mervyn and I are basically brothers now, and we stay in very close contact. I love the man dearly. He handles all of CBC radio and television in the north now, and he's had an amazing career. What I want to say about Meeting Ground, though, when I say I learned a lot more about myself, was I learned about the Indigenous side of my being. My dad was Indigenous, but he ran away from his indigeneity, and I don't blame him for this at all, because what he basically did was run away from a very toxic, very dysfunctional family in Winnipeg. He was born in Portage la Prairie, and our joke always as kids And a little later on was that and it wasn't a joke, but we always kind of thought this was kind of weird. He actually skipped out of school. He ran away from school in grade 2. And he went and lived with my Uncle Dave, who I was named after, literally in a log cabin. He grew up in a log cabin with my Uncle Dave and never went back to school. He was illiterate for the rest of his life. Um, Back then, again, like I say, that was part of the Kirton folklore. But now, through what I learned on Meeting Ground, and of course the time during the time that I was on Meeting Ground was when everybody was starting to realize what residential schools were, and I finally came to learn that my dad came from a residential school. That's why he ran away in grade 2, and that's why my Uncle Dave sheltered him, and then they hid literally in a log cabin. So I learned that about myself and about my family, and I continue now to learn more about my family because I got such a late start. Dad never talked about his family, so there was no. It was like the war too. Dad never talked about the war. You could never ask him questions about that sort of thing, and I wouldn't have known what questions to ask my dad about his indigeneity because I I'll use the word because this is what we called ourselves back in the day. But I knew I was a half breed, but I didn't know where it came from or anything like that, and nor did I pursue it as a kid or as a young adult. It was only through Meeting Ground that I started to realize this is important to pursue because other people are seeing how important it is for them to understand, their ancestry and what leads to who we are today. I still don't have all of the answers to that. What's been very, very frustrating is to find confirmation of where my dad went to residential school. I have asked all the churches, the United Church, the Catholic Church. I'm pretty darn sure it was the United Church because there was a huge residential school in Portage la Prairie that was run by the United Church. But they won't tell you anything. They won't release the names of the students who were at those schools. And so that part's still frustrating to me. But at the same time, I've been working through other people who I've met in my search for my ancestry. Thank God for social media, I guess. And I've learned more about myself. And I learned that our ancestry goes back to way back to a guy who was named Awaken, who was a pretty well-known Métis back in the day, back in the 1800s. And so I've been pretty proud to learn what I've learned, but I still have more to learn. And I'm also proud to be able to vote in Métis elections now because I'm a Métis citizen. And it took me into my adulthood before I started that journey, before I started that search. But I decided that this is very important and I need to continue on. So I probably will continue for the rest of my life to try to continue that or to try to understand who I am, because that's what you got to do. Where you come from helps you understand who you are. So I moved from broadcasting there to my own life, Brady. But the reason I did that is because Meeting Ground meant so much to me in terms of teaching me about my life. And I give Mervyn Brass a lot of credit for that. We've had a lot of conversations about that sort of thing. And just being able to talk to so many knowledgeable people, so many people knowledgeable in Indigenous affairs. So that was a real gift to be a part of Meeting Ground.
Was it tough to accept at first? And I'm sorry if tough is the wrong word to say at this point, but how was it accepting kind of your background after not knowing for so long?
Oh, I know it wasn't tough. I'm embracing it. I'm so proud. So proud to be Métis, and I'm so proud to know people of Métis ancestry who have taught me so much. Robert Doucette was the president of the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, during the time of many years that I was on Meeting Ground, and we had some amazing times together where we would talk in the studio, not with the microphone on, just talk in the studio, and where tears would be flowing down both our cheeks we're talking about the history of the Métis and the history of our families. And I can tell you, Robert has every right to have tears coming down his cheeks when we talk about he's a 60 scoop child whose sister took her own life in a jail cell that she probably shouldn't have been in. And all again, thanks to the 60th scoop. But no, I completely embrace it, and I did right from the beginning, just because of the people that I have met. Just because of the wisdom that I've been able to get. There was an elder by the name of Walter Linklater. His wife is Maria Linklater. She's another elder in Saskatoon, and just amazing couple. And Walter would spend hours with me, and tell stories and listen to me at the same time. And it was just, I was able to jump in and just basically stay afloat with all the wisdom from all of these people that I met, Indigenous people, or First Nations, Métis. So there was, it wasn't tough at all. I got to tell you, it was, and it's still not tough. It's the tough part. The tough part now is not knowing again, and just that frustration that I have with the churches. But the other tough part is, of course, 4.5 years ago, the world kind of turned upside down, and racism was able to resurface again with the election of Donald Trump in the United States, and that racism surfaced not just in the U.S. but right here in Saskatchewan as well, and we see it still today, and it's just so out there now, and that part is tough. There are a lot of people who are amazing and productive members of society who, just because they are Indigenous, have to face that racism. Who are, who just because they have a different colored skin have to undergo that racism or live with that racism. It's unacceptable, but it's surfaced, and I'm worried now that it's probably going to take another few more generations for us to beat this back down underground. We'll never get rid of it, but if we can beat it back down underground, at least we can get that far. But that bothers me lots.
You were on the panel when it came to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Can you kind of take me through that part of your life and having to, I don't want to say deal with creating kind of a platform moving forward when it came to how we talk about Indigenous voice in media as a whole, but can you kind of take us back to that time and how that part of your life was?
So are you talking about the Truth and Reconciliation in the media?
Yeah.
The conference that we put on? Again, so Mervyn Brass and I were involved in that. Mervyn was a co-chair on that committee. Boy, I worked with some amazing people on that committee. John Lajamodier, Doug Cuthand was on that committee as well. And what we wanted to do was have a 2-day conference to let the media, or to help inform the media of Indigenous issues, how to approach Indigenous issues, how to approach Indigenous people. For instance, heading on to a reserve, it's always good protocol to go check in with the chief first before you go start knocking on doors. Many reporters have learned that the hard way. I'll tell you, we were trying to help them not have to be learning it the hard way just by coming to that conference. But we also heard from people like Eugene Arcand. Eugene is a residential school survivor who carries around with him a photograph of the class that he was in during that residential school. And he shows you that picture. And then he also tells you that, and I can't remember the exact number, but pretty well half of the people that are in that picture are dead today, straight because of residential schools. Some through, overdoses, some through violence, whatever, but certainly all relating back to that residential school. And Eugene's message is so powerful. His message isn't belittling the settler, quote unquote, his message is how can we move forward together? But at the same time, he says, you've got to remember what this was. And so I think some people might feel that they get it hammered into them about residential schools, but quite frankly, the country hasn't shaken yet. That's what I think. The country is going to need a good shakeup before we get past the truth part of truth and reconciliation. People have to accept the truth before there's going to be any kind of reconciliation. If a vast majority of people don't accept that truth, and it is the truth, then there's no way that we'll achieve a reconciliation. And that racism that I talked about won't get stamped underground once again. It'll stay on top of the surface. Anyway, there was a good 2 days. Good information that reporters, news directors, editors were able to go away with. Good questions from them, because it was about how do we cover these stories with respect? How do we make sure that we're not asking questions that don't show respect and the like? And I think it's helped people move along in their coverage of Indigenous stories. It's going to be tough. And I think, well, you know this. I think you've seen your colleagues struggle with this as well. Being non-Indigenous, covering an Indigenous story, it can be tough. A lot of non-Indigenous reporters don't know the history that they should know about that, but that's because their institutions, when they went to school, wasn't teaching them that stuff at the time yet, right? And a lot of them have taken it upon themselves, thank God, to do that. But it is tough to be non-Indigenous and cover Indigenous stories, so I give them credit for that. If we could have helped them a little bit in that conference, I hope we did.
I don't know if you'd have any one piece of advice, but if I'm a young journalist or if I'm a young broadcaster listening right now, and just based on what you had just said about kind of Indigenous voice and being respectful, what sort of advice would you give someone that may feel uncomfortable in those situations?
Talk to elders, talk to the chief. And don't be afraid to call the elders and just straight out say, look, I'm feeling uncomfortable, or look, I don't know how to approach this, or just be straight with your questions. Take some tobacco and talk to them, and they'll spend the time with you, just like Walter spent that time with me. And of course, our conversation would digress away from anything media into our own lives as well, and which was very helpful. So you know what? Seek out the elders. And they are super approachable. I always believe that that's to be the case. Now, if many people who are non-Indigenous will hear me say elder, and they're thinking old people with gray hair. That's not necessarily the truth. You know, there are a lot of good people out there who are. You don't have to seek out 80-year-olds to seek out elders. There are some amazing Indigenous people out there who I consider to be an elder, who might even be younger than me. So just go seek out those knowledge holders. Maybe even work your way through Wanaskewin or the treaty commissioner, and they will help you big time as well. And by the way, don't ever be afraid to make that call to the treaty commissioner, to that office, and ask them for advice and help as well. That's what they're there for.
Along my career, I really consider you a mentor. Definitely when it came to my development when I was at CKOM.
Well, you're screwed.
even going back to the North Battleford days, there was one thing you said to me. We were doing a training session, and you said I did something really well, and I took it to the head. Head got a little big, couldn't make it through the doorway. But at the same time, you said, if your head gets too big, I will just play your old meeting ground stuff from when you were in the Battlefords. Was I that bad, David?
No, you weren't that bad. You were that raw. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it's you know what? It's wonderful. I should have mentioned this when I was talking about Meeting Ground. Working with people like you, because you were working out of the Battlefords. Nigel Maxwell would be working out of Prince Albert, and we would work at a distance, right? We'd always be on the phone talking to each other. But I would be able to hear your reports, and this gave you an opportunity to do some long form stuff, and that's what I loved about Meeting Ground as well, being able to do some long form reporting. But I'd listen to your piece, and I'd notice the things that I needed to mention in terms of a good constructive criticism. Uh, I would listen to a separate piece maybe half a year later, and all of that stuff was gone. You had the ability to listen to it, not get an ego in the way or anything like that, and grow from it, right? And so it was always wonderful to work with people like you, young reporters, I guess back in the day, who start out raw and who are willing to listen and make the changes. And listen to you today, man. You sound fantastic. Your writing is amazing. So I just, you know what? I'll take credit for that.
Yes, I'm giving you a lot of credit because thank you. Like even the little things, you just kind of look back and you're like, how would you say it to me? Well, like this. Then write that, Brady.
that's one of the things I told everybody. Don't be trying to be so officious with your writing. If I'm sitting across the table from you, how would you tell me? And that's exactly and it works so well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And kind of looking at your career, I know that this one might be a tough one for you, but when it came to working at Sea Juice, that was the one at the U of S, correct?
Yep.
What would be the one piece of advice that you would give yourself then, now that you know what you know all the way through your career?
Don't take yourself so seriously. Man, when I was playing that classical music in at noon hours at Sea Juice, and maybe three other people were listening, I thought this has got to be serious, and I can't make a mistake, and all everything like that. And you would just you'd ruin it. I would ruin it by being so serious. So don't take yourself so seriously. Enjoy it. If it ain't fun, find something else. If it's I mean, there every station, every newspaper, every TV station has its own politics. That's stuff you can't get away from. But if the job itself isn't fun, get out, because it isn't going to change. And you're always going to be critiqued. You're always going, and you should always be critiqued. I was 43 years in the business, and 42 and a half years into that business, I was still being critiqued, right? And I was thanking people for that, because they would catch something that I was doing for the last year. We end up with crutch words, right? Lots of times. One of my crutch words was absolutely. And that's how you use crutch words, of course, to buy time while your brain's trying to think of what to say. And so I do the yeah, absolutely, after somebody said something. And all I was trying to do was buy that time. So somebody would tell me that that's a crutch word, and I can clean that up. So don't take yourself so seriously, and plan on always being critiqued, but for the better. And it's, of course, the way our bosses approach it that makes all the difference in the world as well. So if you're a boss out there and you're the one doing the critiquing, uh, be sure to be as positive as possible. Don't just talk about the negative in that person's report. There's got to be something good in it as well. You wouldn't have put it on the air if there wasn't something good in it. Mention that as well. So, but that's my main thing. I wish I wouldn't have been so serious at the beginning. I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk about this, but I was so serious in the business that I probably lost my first family as a result of that. I dived into the business and I gave it 24/7, and that was at a cost. That came with a cost. And if I were to say anything about that now, I would tell young people it's just a job. Go home to your family. Make sure that you spend time with your child. Make sure that you spend time with your partner, because it is just a job. Somehow I felt I was so important that I needed to be at the radio or TV station 12 hours a day, and I didn't need to be that. And I wish I wouldn't have done that now. You know what I mean?
I get you. That's some great advice, David. Thank you. Another question I had for you, your career kind of took you outside into Alberta. What was it that kept bringing you back to Saskatchewan?
I guess even after what I just said, but I guess family, and I love Saskatchewan. I got to say, when I was in Edmonton, and we got to remember that this was 25, maybe 30 years ago. When I was in Edmonton, I went to a high school our radio station team was going to play a basketball game against a high school team, one of those things. And so we went there for a day during the day one time during the weekday, and I saw a police officer walking up and down the hallway. I'd never seen it, a uniformed police officer. And then stopped to talk to her. And I said, "So what are you doing here?" And she says, "Well, this is my beat. My beat's this school and whatever other school was right across the park." And I thought, wow, ooh, it's kind of scary when you got to have a police officer, stationed inside a school. But that's what life was and is in Edmonton. That night when we came back to play the game, I brought my padlock, and I put my leather jacket in a locker in the gym, in the locker room in the gym, and my wallet and everything like that. Padlocked it and played the game. Came back out. Somebody had broken in, even with the padlock, and I'd lost all that stuff. Those two incidents in that one day kind of told me, maybe you don't want to live in Edmonton. Maybe you're not a big city boy. And I, you know what? I'm not a big city boy. So that's when I decided if I get an opportunity, I think I'll move back to Saskatchewan. And that opportunity came first with me moving to Moose Jaw. So Alberta's nice, and I enjoy it, and I still have some tremendous friendships from that. I don't think I'd ever live in a big city again, though. I think Saskatoon is as big as I want to get.
You've been around kind of the media industry for decades and decades, I'll say.
Okay.
How much, I know that you've seen everything change, but really how much has changed in the media industry, coming from the way someone puts together an article, presents that article or that piece of information? How much has it really changed since you started to now?
Sadly, I'd say that it's changed in the way that our decision makers in the media believe that people don't have any kind of long-term attention span. And so stories on the radio that used to be 45 seconds, maybe even 50 seconds, are now 30, 25 seconds. The clips within those stories used to be 20 seconds. And now the decision makers want them to be down to less than 7 seconds. I don't think those stories are as good as what we could tell, obviously, with the extra seconds, if we could put 45 or 50-minute stories on there. So I'm disappointed in that. When I started out, newscasts were 10 minutes long. I laugh at that now because when do we hear a newscast that's 10 minutes long anymore? I don't think we, unless we've got a half-hour clock kind of thing, we're not really hearing 10 minutes of news anymore. What we're trying to do is squeeze the same amount of news into a 5-minute or 4-minute newscast. It's pretty tough to do sometimes. It's pretty tough to do and give the listener a complete story, a complete compelling story. So that's one of the things that I've seen change. Obviously, social media has played a big role in how we deliver, when we deliver news, all that sort of thing. But I think it still has the decision makers thinking that people aren't ready to hear the basically longer stories. I would say that's probably the biggest change that I've noticed over the course of time. Radio stations, of course, and now let me move away from news for a moment. One of my favorite things back in the day, I'd be driving along at 11 o'clock at night along the highway, and I'd be listening to an 18-year-old disc jockey working out of Rosetown or out of Swift Current. And I loved that, hearing that kind of raw broadcasting. And it was, it's fun to listen for the mistakes, but it was also fun to hear the passion of that raw broadcaster. Technology has taken all of that away. You don't have a live broadcaster anymore at that time of night. Anywhere. It doesn't matter, big city or small town. So that part has changed. Technology has cost a lot of jobs. It has in every industry, but I watched it cost a lot of jobs in broadcasting as well, and I'm sad about that.
If you can take out your crystal ball, in 5 years, what does the media landscape not just look like, but also sound? And I don't know how to phrase this with the right sense, but what should we be looking at, and what should we be expecting when it comes to the way news is delivered, like I said, in those 5 years?
First thing I thought of when you asked that question were the 24-hour news channels, how they changed over the last, 10 years, maybe even the last 6 or 7 years. We would tune into CNN and we'd get news. We'd get top of the hour news 15 minutes after the hour. They even had a segment in there all the time, around the world in 60 seconds. They'd have background music and they have headlines about what's happening around the world. Now you tune into those channels, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, it doesn't matter which one. You don't get news anymore. You get opinion. And to the point that there'll be 5 faces on that television screen, all screaming opinion at you. I would hope that that the viewer is going to have enough of that and move away from that, and that they'll see their audiences drop, and that they'll realize that people are sick of opinion and would rather just get the news back. People don't want to hear you with opinion. They don't want to hear me when I'm anchoring a newscast. They don't want to hear opinion. They want to hear the facts. They want to hear the stories. I don't know why 24-hour news channels don't realize that. I guess there are better minds than mine who decided that they were going to opinion because that's how they were going to grab audiences. I just think that's short term. I don't think we're going to see the audiences stay with that opinion, because the opinion now is forced. It's, we're almost looking and pulling hairs out of people to try to get them to say something controversial or say something that they can use that'll be quoted later on, that sort of thing. I would hope that we would see 24-hour news channels actually become, once again, 24-hour news channels and not opinion. Locally in radio, I don't see much change. I got to tell you, and everybody knows this, radio was the first medium. And ever since then, movies came along. Everybody said that was going to kill radio. Didn't kill radio. Television came along. Everybody said it was going to kill radio. Didn't kill radio. Satellite radio came along. Same thing. It was going to kill local radio, and it didn't. The same thing with social media. It hasn't killed local radio. Local radio is always going to be there, and I think it's going to be there in the form that we know it today. And that means that you get up in the morning, and the first thing that people care about is the weather. And so you're still going to hear a whole lot of weather forecasts, and certainly hear what the local temperature is as you're getting ready for your day, as you come out of the shower or whatever. I don't think that's ever going to change. I think we're going to always have that because people want that, and there's a comfort level that comes with that. When you have somebody like Brent Laux waking you up in the morning, or Robin Shada waking you up in the morning on C95, there's a tremendous comfort level with that, and a trust level as well. So for radio, I don't see any change, because you know what? Like I say, through movies, through television, through satellite radio, through social media, radio hasn't really changed, and it still survives. Not just survives, but still thrives. So I don't expect to see much change in local radio. I don't know about local TV. I think that's been tough for local TV, just because 25 years ago, there were 3 channels in Saskatoon. Now there are, I don't know how many, 335 channels in Saskatoon. That's got to be tough. Got to be tough to sell advertising with that. So I don't know if there's going to be more changes with that. And then, of course, newspapers. Newspapers over the course of the last 5 years have basically collapsed, and they still haven't found an answer for that. The answer is not online. Not if people don't, not a lot of people, I'm not going to say everybody, but not a lot of people are prepared to pay for news still. And so that's the challenge. We were always prepared to pay for news in the newspaper, but there was that had a tradition behind it, the tradition of newspaper. Now with online, people don't want to pay for that, and so they'll go elsewhere. And well, places like CBC that have got that digital first policy of theirs have really kicked the heck out of radio, and they've literally ripped the stars out of newspapers to work with them over on the radio side as well on CBC. So I think newspapers are still going to. The story's not over yet, but I feel that they've got to make one great big change. I don't know what that is yet, but if they don't, I don't think we're going to see the newspaper industry survive.
One thing that I wasn't really told in preparations for my career, and I know it's the same with a lot of people, you're focusing on getting to not just the next place, but the best place. What you see kind of yourself as a journalist or a reporter or a broadcaster. I think something that gets grazed over is local news and the idea of local news. Can you kind of tell me how important local news is, not just to that local market, but kind of on a global scale?
Well, I could go back to my campaign because it kind of reinforced within me how important local news is. When I was asking people what their biggest concerns were, it was, I want to open my door and I want to look outside and I want to know that I'm safe. And that means I want to know that I'm safe because there's a whole bunch of snow on the ground and I need that picked up, or there's criminal element in my block and I need that cleaned up, or there are traffic problems on my road and I need that dealt with. I want to be safe. And that told me that when they get up and they open that door, they're not looking at Iran, they're not looking at Afghanistan, they're thinking about what's happening right here. Local news reflects that. And if there is a rash of some particular crime, that's what people they want to listen for because it'll affect them possibly. Last year there was some jackass who was riding along on a bike in Fairhaven and Parkridge areas, and he had a BB gun and he was shooting out the windows, windshields and windows of all the cars that were parked on the street. Police waited until there were 36 incidents before they set out any kind of public alert about this, and that drove me nuts. I thought we could have done that a whole lot faster. But my point is, the radio stations and the local TV stations ran that alert, and I saw right across the street from where I live people parking on their lawns after that, and it worked. So local radio helps you make it through the day. Local radio keeps you safe by helping with alerts such as that. There's no way that people could even function without knowing what's going on in their own neighborhoods or in their own cities. Don't get me wrong. What's going on in Israel and Palestine right now? That means a lot to a lot of people right here where we live. But it still has nowhere near the effect on us as something local, as if there was another large snowfall. So local radio helps you through that snowfall. As a matter of fact, we talked about that one snow event, and that was in the year 2020. Back in 2007, there was another snow event that was similar to this that crippled the city. And I ended up being on the air for 8 hours that day. And all I did was talk about snow that day. And I've still got all the emails and letters that people sent in as a result of that, as we helped them through their day that day. They were stuck. They couldn't move, but at least they knew that, other people were in the same boat. They knew it was going to be 8 or 9 o'clock before they got home. They were at least told that, and we gave them that sense of comfort knowing that A, they weren't alone, and B, there's an end to this. Other people are getting home, so you'll get home as well. So there's many ways in which local radio affects our lives, but it's basically just reflecting what's going on in our community, but it's helping people make it through that day too. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it did. Thank you for that. And I was just gonna say, only 8 hours. I had like 10 on the blizzard day.
Did you?
Yeah, it was not a fun day for me.
Oh, wait a minute now. You weren't on the air for 10. I wasn't on the air for 8.
I was just doing the newscast. So I guess, yeah. Now I look like the asshole. One big question I had for you as well. How has Phil been dealing with not just the career change of you, but the career change for him as well?
Yeah, I still call him Phil the News Hound, but now he's moved to the dark side and he's become my communications assistant. He's okay with it. He's fine.
That's why I couldn't get a hold of you for weeks.
That's right. He was in between both of us.
In all seriousness, though, like how much of a change was it routine wise, even for you, going from, the day to day that you knew to the day to day that you kind of had no idea what you were going into?
In those final years of broadcasting, because of my years, right, a lot of people would come and ask me questions about how to do this or best ways and things like that. And without hesitation, I'd offer that advice. Because I just knew so much. Just again, and don't get me wrong, I'm not smart. It's just I was in it for so long. I feel still, but I certainly felt like it on those first days as a member of city council, but I still feel like I'm a child in this. And I'm the one now looking for some mentorship. And thank goodness there are a couple of people they're all great people on city council, but there are a couple of people that I've been really leaning on city council. And I've been asking those same kind of dumbass questions that probably they've been asked many times before, but they're helping me. So I went from knowing everything to knowing nothing. And I joke that the learning curve is vertical. It's not a curve at all. It's a wall. There's so much to learn to again make the proper decisions and to do good governance. I've also learned though that there are many passionate people that work within the city. We always joke about city workers and the like. The passion to make this city grow and to make the city sustain within City Hall is truly amazing, and it was a real eye opener. And these aren't people who are just making a salary. These are people who are living, eating, and breathing the city of Saskatoon. And I wish more people would realize that complain about things. I wish they would realize that there is a real passion for this city in City Hall. So that's those are the few things I learned. I actually forgot the question that you asked me, so I totally digressed out of that one.
I kind of forget it too, but I'm one of those guys that doesn't like writing down questions, and sometimes it bites me, and sometimes it just sounds so much better and more organic. But
it'll never bite you. You know what? I don't like writing down questions either. I like reacting to how people, that person might say something and then, oh, well, let's talk about that then, because that's more interesting. And it shows that you're curious about it too. And it shows that you're listening. Arsenio Hall was a late night talk show for I don't know, maybe about a year. He was one of the worst at listening to his guests. I swear the Pope could have been a guest on there and could have mentioned that, his wife was at home right now, and Arsenio would have still gone on to the next question, not even hearing that the Pope was now married, and should have maybe jumped on that. So what you're doing is bang on. You're listening to the guest and you're reacting to what the guest says. I suspect that you came in with some, with a plan.
I had an idea, yeah.
Yeah, right, and that's cool. And that's a skeleton, maybe, of a vision for the way that this interview was going to go. But if it doesn't go that way, that's great. That means that things happen that you reacted to, and something else developed as a result of that. And those are the most dynamic conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And I thank you again for jumping on the podcast this week, whenever that may be. It's May 14th today. So one question I had for you, and this is going to be my final question, unless we go on another tangent that ends up
Okay.
ending somewhere else. But I feel like I would be remiss not to ask you this question. What do you, David Kirton, miss the most about radio?
The people. Without hesitation again. I met my best friends, and I met brothers, and I've met sisters, and I've got brothers and sisters now from radio that will always be a part of my life. The people were definitely, when I talk about how city workers are passionate about Saskatoon, I don't think there's a person who works in radio who's not passionate about that business as well. And so it's wonderful to be able to, live off of that passion, maybe stir some of that passion, that sort of thing. I miss the people more than anything else. I don't miss those half-hour deadlines. I don't miss being stuck in the studio, but I miss all you guys.
Well, we miss you too, David. I think this is the perfect kind of way to end the interview. Thank you for kind of going on this ride with me. But one thing I like to do before we say goodbye to each and every one of our guests is give you the floor to kind of promote what you want to promote. And also, can you put in your either social medias or the best way that someone could find you if they want to reach out to you or ask you a question about anything you said here on the podcast? So the floor is yours, David.
Well, I guess on Facebook, I'm David Kirton Ward 3. On Twitter, what's my handle on Twitter? I've got to look again. I think it's Dave. For whatever reason, it's Dave Kirton. No, Dave Kirton Ward 3. It had to be Dave, not David, because they wouldn't allow any more characters in there.
Yeah.
So that's the way that people can get a hold of me.
Okay, perfect.
What was your other question on that? What was that?
Also, if you want to promote anything you'd like to promote, something special to your heart, David.
Sure. If you ever think about going to one of those maskless protests, maybe give your head a shake, because, and my girlfriend hates it when I say this, and I've been saying it publicly for way too long now. When I take a look at those maskless protests, I realize that you just can't fix stupid. How about we leave it at that?
I ran that clip of you saying that so much that day. And you know what? As weird as it sounds, in mid-June, this may not be an issue, but we're going to listen back to this and we're going to smile. So again, David, thank you and all the best moving forward.
Brady, thank you very much. Great interview, man. It's been fun to talk to you.
Thanks again.